Good afternoon, everyone. All of our panelists are in the Zoom room. We're so excited to have you here for So You Think You Want to Go to Law School. As I said, my name is Jennifer Wilkes and I direct the Warfield Center here at UT Austin. Before continuing, I want to acknowledge that those of us in North America are on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. And we'd also like to pay our respects to those tribes and communities who have been or have become part of these lands and territories in Texas. So briefly, by way of introduction, this event was inspired by two former students who were both passionate about going to law school. While writing their respective letters of recommendation, I was reminded of just how important human resources are for navigating big life decisions. So members of our academic, professional, and social communities. Thanks to the generous enthusiasm of our panelists and the expert organization of Senior Program Coordinator Christina Bryant, the Warfield Center is delighted to bring together some of the best human resources that UT and Greater Austin have to offer to speak on this topic. You've seen their biographies in our pre-panel slides. If not, we're recording the session and you can access that information later. But in the interest of time, I'm going to share their names and affiliations here. So we have Fallon Jones, member of the class of UT class of 2022 and Vice President of the UT Pre-Law Division of the National Black Law Students Association. Karintha Fenley, Law School Admissions and Career Coach at UT Liberal Arts Career Services. Jason Onyediri, JD candidate at UT School of Law. Shavonne Henderson, Assistant Dean for Equity and Inclusion and lecturer at Texas Law. And last but not least, Brian McGiverin, Executive Director of Austin Community Law Center. So I will start things off with a question or two for each panelist. And after that, we'll open the floor for discussion. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat or to raise your virtual hand to ask them live. The Warfield Center team, with a fantastic assist from Art Galleries at Black Studies Kendall Gross, will be scanning the chat and the Zoom room to make sure that we don't miss anything. So I'm going to ask the initial question in the order that I list our panelists. And you may have noticed that I'm going to be moving from pre-law students to advising in liberal arts at UT, to current law student, to our assistant dean from the law school, to practicing attorney, just to kind of give us a guide to like moving through this process. And again, the floor is going to be open for what I hope will be a robust discussion. So Fallon, thank you for joining the group today. And I'd like to start with you. I'll go ahead and throw two questions at you, choose which one you want to answer. The first is, what campus resources have been helpful to you as you plan to attend law school? That's the first question. And the second is, why should students join pre-professional groups like UT's National Black Law Student Association?
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you all so much for having me on here today. So your first question was what resources on campus have helped me. Definitely drop-ins with the law advisor here on UT campus. When I was doing drop-ins, it was Dr. Hong, but I believe now it's Dr. Falcon. That's honestly the best thing that can help you because they know exactly what you're going through. They know how to advise the students, especially like me. I wasn't 100% sure a few years ago if I wanted to go to law school, and they gave me great advice about what to look out for. They told me to join the BALSA. They were saying, oh, we know about the president of the BALSA, you should join them. And they give you other resources like law book handbooks and all the different resources you might need to do research about law school. So I think that has been the greatest asset for me personally, because without them, I definitely wouldn't be on this track I am now. And I think it's very important to join pre-professional organizations like NABALSA, because even within our org, we have guest speakers every meeting who come to us and give us different resources and advice about their process while going to law school, where they are now, how they got there. And we have like a resume book within our organization. So when guest speakers come out and they're like, hey, do you have a sophomore who's interested in this type of law? Can we have their information, their resume? It's always a great resource, and it plugs our students in with professionals out in the law world. So I definitely encourage students to join a pre-professional org before applying to law school and going to law school.
Thank you so much, Fallon. And your responses, I think, provide a wonderful segue to Karintha Fenley from Liberal Arts Career Services. So Karintha, my questions for you are, so what does UT Liberal Arts Career Services provide, and you in particular as a law school admissions coach? And then the question that I often wonder about as a professor is, does it matter what students major in if they want to apply to law school?
Those are both excellent questions. I definitely encourage students, especially if you're a liberal arts major, the Career Services Center for you is amazing and provides wonderful resources to you. As a and they basically provide all kinds of resources from career, job, internship searching, as well as resume and mock interview support as well. For my particular role within the Career Services Center here, I basically provide pre-law advising, not just to liberal arts majors, but to majors across campus. So my audience is a little broader. And so basically what that entails is providing tools and resources for students. It doesn't matter if they're in the beginning stages and just thinking about law school and what does that process even look like, all the way up into, getting into, okay, now I've applied, and what does it look like after I apply, with dealing with things like potentially wait lists and multiple offers and funding and things like that. So really here to help throughout that whole process. I also help with resumes, personal statement reviews for law school applications, which can be very helpful. So please come see me to set up appointments and handshake. You just want to go through the handshake system to do so and set up a pre-law appointment with me. But basically, the question in regards to major, this is a very popular question. I get this a lot, especially for folks who maybe are in transition and thinking about changing majors, and they want to find out if it matters and how does that work. The answer to that question is honestly, law schools are looking for diversity. So they really, and that includes major selection. So they don't really, from what I've heard from law school admissions offices, they don't really care. They don't have a preference on a specific type of major. And so, for them, when they form that 1L class, they're looking for maybe somebody from a science background, somebody from a finance background, somebody from a government background. So really what I tell students is pursue the major of choice that is most interesting to you, that you will do well in with those classes that you're passionate about. But certainly make sure that it's classes you'll do well in. Folks may like physics, but make sure that those are classes you will do well in, and make sure not to hurt your GPA with either. So it's definitely careful decision-making process there. But that's all I have for that.
Oh, thank you, Karintha. And that's really helpful to think broadly about the law school admissions process. You don't have to be in liberal arts to apply to law school, or indeed to meet with Karintha and the other advisors in liberal arts career services. And I think your response is really insightful, because it also helps us think about the variety of ways that one could practice law. So if, Austin is a tech hub, so if you're going to be working in law related to the tech sector, then a computer science major would be a fantastic complement to your law degree. So thank you, that's incredibly helpful, and I'm sure folks will have more questions for you when we get to discussion. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to Jason Onyediri, and I'm just gonna, I hope embarrass Jason in a good way and share that he is one of those students that I referenced earlier. And writing his letter of recommendation was one of the easiest letters I've had to write because he was so prepared for law school. But now, Jason, you are a 2L, right? You're in your second year of law school. So my questions for you are, even with all of that excellent preparation, is there anything that you wish you had known before beginning law school? And then the second question is, what Texas law resources have been helpful to you, exciting to you as a current student?
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Professor, for your kind words. I really appreciate that. And as the individual who's in law school currently on a panel called Do You Want to Go to Law School, or So You Want to Go to Law School, I think it's incumbent on me to share with you guys what my experience is like currently and what it was like my first year. So in terms of what was the most challenging aspects of law school, I'm going to say the material. The material is quite difficult, and I won't sugarcoat that. The workload is pretty significant as well. There is an incredible amount of reading in law school, and it's relentless. It's virtually every single day. Now, the good part of that is that the information and the material that you're reading is usually interesting. If you want to go to law school, if you like the law, if you like legal quandaries, you're going to have fun reading some of this material. And that may not be the case for every single class, but for many classes, that will be the case. I'll also say that the sacrifices that you have to make as being a law student can be challenging as well. I've had friends come into town on weekends where I had a ton of work to do, and I just couldn't see them. When I was an undergrad, that was the sort of thing that I was always able to do, but you do have to make some sacrifices in law school just on behalf of how much work is sort of put in front of you. Now, hopefully those sacrifices are worth it if you're pursuing a career that you really enjoy. But nonetheless, they're sacrifices, and so that can be a challenge. In terms of what I wish I knew before coming to law school, you hear sort of these different takes on law school and sort of how much energy you should put at the front end of law school, right? People say things like law school is not a sprint, it's a marathon. You need your longevity is important, or they'll say the opposite. It's not a marathon, it's a sprint. It's all about how well you do in your first semester. And I'm going to say neither of those things are true. I think that it's sort of a combination. It really, really, really is important to do well in your first semester, first year of law school, but it's not the end all be all. There are 2 more years of law school. And the reason why people say it's so important to do well in your first year is because if you're interested in going into what folks call big law, that's working for major firms that have hundreds of attorneys, and these are the generally more lucrative and prestigious jobs. You're going to want to have good first year grades because recruiting generally happens after your first year. But there are a whole host of other things that you can do in law school, and there are a whole host of other things you can do with your legal career. And so, yeah, I'll emphasize that you really want to do as well as you can, as early as you can, and be as prepared as you can. Which I think if you're at a panel called So You Want to Go to Law School, you're already on the right track in that regard. But you also want to make sure that you get through the 3 years and that you don't burn out. And so, yeah, I would say that's something I wish I knew coming into law school, is sort of keeping that in mind as you're going through it. It's not to sort of, don't burn out and, keep on the right track. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate your combination of candor, but also enthusiasm. So Dean Henderson, we've invited you here as someone who wears multiple hats, right? So you are a dean in the law school, you teach in the law school. So we'd love to hear from you based on those experiences. And so first I'd like to ask you about the admissions process because, from outside, those of us writing letters of recommendation, applying to law school, we don't know what's going on once those materials reach the admissions committee. Is there an admissions committee? So could you talk a bit about what happens in the law school admissions process, please? And then the second question is having, let's say, a global perspective as an administrator. So you see first year students, second year, third year, right? As a professor, what piece of advice would you give to students who are interested in going to law school?
Well, thank you for having me. And as a grad of UT, alum, I plan to in government. I'm so very grateful for many of the people that were in ads before it was called ads when I was a student. So thank you for having me. And I've been on the 40 acres. It feels like a lifetime. But as far as our admissions process is concerned, as a public institution, we do undertake a very holistic review of applicants. Unfortunately, the applicant pool is often competitive and has over the years grown more competitive. I want to say this last year we had nearly 7,000 applications for about 300 seats in the law school, and that's ebbed and flowed. We on average get about 5,000 applications for those seats, and the law school class size has fluctuated, at least at Texas Law, some in the last 10-15 years, from anywhere to upwards of 450, 500 to 300. But we in the last kind of more modern era of our law school, last 10 years, have kept the class size at about 300. So with that, it is competitive. However, we as a part of that holistic review, what we're looking for are dynamic students, people who come from a myriad of backgrounds, life experiences, that will really offer to the engaging environment that exists in the law school space. Most of what the law is a project and study in people. It is a social science in and of itself. And so we are looking for people who have commitments to service. We're looking for people who have backgrounds and qualities that otherwise would be supportive of the very important work that lawyers do, both in communities and companies and abroad, more globally. So, I mean, there are a ton of factors that we do look at. Does someone have any graduate study experience? Have they demonstrated a particular commitment to service? Have they demonstrated any work experience, real life experience? Are there other unique qualities about them, from whether or not it's their abilities? We've got musicians, we've got singers, we've got a very active theatrical contingent within the law school space, and we annually host an event that centers around some of those more non-traditional skills, at least for us, right? But there's a really interesting space around how math and science people function in the law school space. So that's also something that we look at. But our admissions committee does take a look at all of the applicants. Holistically, we'll find opportunities to engage along the way if applicants are interested in wanting to either get a tour and I'll drop some of these links in the chat. But we offer opportunities for prospective students to meet with our existing students to figure out, is Texas law a good fit for them? We've got admissions ambassadors, and our assistant dean of admissions has really put together a really good team, many of them who have been there a very long time, who have a lot of breadth and depth of experience with Texas law as an institution. And your second question on, remind me again, what was it?
Sure.
My perspective, advice, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So advice. One thing I really suggest to students is to think about your goals for entering into law school. I think it's very important for people to, as much as possible, be true to themselves in the practice of law. Find things that interest them, and find law to be a project of iteration, right? So I've had 9 lives in the law. I've done everything from big law to policy work to being an assistant dean of career services to teaching. I've never let the degree define me in one unique way, and I think that's one of the benefits of a law degree. But I often encourage students to really sit back and think about if law school is the thing that they want to do. What is your goal with it? how would you want to use the degree, and ultimately trying to be as true to that as possible. You may come into law school with one dream and find yourself getting back to that dream a bit later, but really kind of keeping that dream centered. So if it's serving community, serving people who look like you, serving children, whatever that hope is, to really try to stay true to that, because I think that keeps you the happiest. And I think to Jason's point, it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of, it can be a demanding project of work, right? But if you are really committed to it, I think there's beauty in it.
Thank you, Dean Henderson. I love this, the centering of people, right? And centering of one's goals and letting those be the compasses that guide you through the process. Our final panelist, just in terms of the guided questions, and we have plenty of time for a discussion, is attorney Brian McGiverin. And so our practicing attorney on the panel. So I have 2 questions for you out of the batch that we sent. So the first is, what have been some of the most rewarding aspects of your career? And from reading your bio, that tells me that you've also, worked in multiple realms, public policy, in government, now with the Austin Community Law Center. So what have been some of the most rewarding aspects of those experiences? And then, because you are a practicing attorney, what are some of the common misperceptions about practicing law that those of us from the outside or in the early stages of thinking about a legal career might have, from watching TV, from other media sources, because the law is a career that, does figure prominently in a lot of the media that we consume?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm excited to contribute to this discussion. If it's okay, I think I'd like to begin by answering the second question. What are some of the common misperceptions about practicing the law? I would say that one misperception kind of relates back to the observation about being a marathon versus a sprint. You watch movies or TV shows about like trials, for instance, and because it's a movie, you get this story with a linear progression, a first act, a second act, and a third act, and it climaxes, and hopefully it's a happy ending and everyone's excited. And that does happen, but most days of work are, a day of work when you go and plug in time to a particular case or a particular project. And it is about being able to strike a pace that you're able to maintain, which also includes work-life balance. I mean, I think, with regard to success in the legal field, it's much less important where you've gone to school, and it's less important like what traits or qualities you may bring to it. I think what I have found is a common thread, particularly the further you get away from law school. The key feature that dictates your success is your commitment to actually doing the work and doing it the right way. However, it's a tightrope because it's very easy to fall into the trap of overworking yourself and sort of courting, no pun intended, courting burnout. And so it is important to have structures in your life to, with friends, with family, with interests, to maintain a work-life balance. So that you may love your job, but you're not living to work. You're working to live, and ideally with a job that you really enjoy. Another misconception, different areas of practice, like the day-to-day workload or life of that, can be wildly different. And I think that's important because on one hand, you want to do work that is meaningful to you, that you think is important and makes a difference. But the type of day-to-day living you can be in can vary from, so I began my career at the Texas Civil Rights Project, which is primarily a federal civil practice, which is a reading, research, and writing practice. You're in front of your computer, doing a lot of writing, a lot of research, and depending on the circumstances, possibly reviewing a lot of discovery. On the flip side, if you are a criminal defense attorney and you're focused in state court, which most are, you're pretty much on your feet in court every day. Not necessarily performing, but you're out and you're talking to people. And it's a higher volume practice in terms of the clients. In federal practice, you live with a case for 2, 3, or more years. 4 or 5 if there's an appeal and a retrial sometimes. With other areas of practice like criminal defense and a lot of, but not all of family law, it's much shorter duration by comparison. I mean, they're not over overnight, but you meet a lot more people, and depending on whether you prefer being in front of an audience and chatting or not, whether you know, kind of your level of gregariousness, I guess, that sort of thing. Different things will appeal to you more. And the best way to find out what appeals to you is to try to dip your toes into different areas if you can. Because I feel like you don't really know, or you can't really be certain how you feel about something until you've tried it. And so while you're in school, if you do go to law school, UT Law has an impressively robust set of opportunities for clinical work, which actually I think are far more important than the remainder of the course load for actually preparing someone for the real world. And this is a town that also has a lot of internship opportunities. And so I think I would encourage people to get experience, both because it improves them professionally, and I think because of the knowledge of that, it is good on a resume, but also because it will help you better understand what you are passionate about. So common misperceptions about practicing law. I'm going to shift gears actually to what have been the most rewarding aspects of my career. Well, so I've always worked in, well, not always, I've worked predominantly in the nonprofit sector, and in both sectors, almost exclusively with people who didn't have a ton of access to legal services, wherein if that nonprofit wasn't there, or if I wasn't taking very low fees for my work, they wouldn't have had access to an attorney. And if you can imagine that that's a problem. And then as a practicing attorney who has sat in courtrooms and watched cases unfold where there was no attorney on one side or the other, it's bad news. Often, I mean, it can work out, but it's often bad news. And so well, it's not that. Okay, I was gonna say the news isn't quite that bad, but because recording stopped. Being able to like intervene meaningfully in a person's life, and even more so if you can, well, it doesn't have to be a situation where you're like necessarily uniquely qualified or positioned to do it, but there are opportunities to help people when you can, for a fact that you've made a material impact on their future. That's easily the most rewarding thing. And that can pop up in a lot of different fields. We're actually a general practice, and so preventing an eviction, stopping a contract for deed scheme so someone doesn't lose the home that they've been in for 20 years. It's a family law case. There are a lot of family law cases where there are dimensions of financial and physical abuse of all sorts of things, where people, if nothing else, are afraid of losing their kids. And there are things you can do for that, but if they're by themselves, that can quickly go awry. Criminal defense. Most things that are against the law are things that we don't want people to be doing, but also in Texas, the punishments for those things are usually astronomically higher than what you might feel is warranted. So there are a lot of opportunities to like have meaningfully intervening in people's lives. To really know what those are, though, too, I think the best way to figure that out is to explore different options so you can get that sort of firsthand experience. I think it's really smart to research on the front end, different career paths you might want to take. I mean, you had mentioned, using our desires, our passions as a compass. And I like that metaphor. I think what you do when you set off for a journey is think as hard as you can about where you want to go. Make the best plan you can for that route. That includes like researching people who are talking to people who are already doing it. Bearing in mind that you may need to course correct as you go, because you may decide you'd like to go somewhere else, or maybe the first plan wasn't like the best designed path. And just be prepared to stop, check in, and readjust as necessary, both on your desires and just the plans to get there. And I think I'm probably at 7 minutes, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Brian. That was wonderful. So I have some follow-up questions of my own, but because this panel is not for me, I would like to open the floor to our attendees. So again, the chat, use the raise your hand feature that Zoom has. You'll click on reactions in the lower right-hand side of your screen and then choose raise hand. But please take advantage of our panelists' generosity and expertise and ask them your questions about going to law school. And I am scanning. Let's see. Okay, so I see we have a question in the chat from Camille. Does anyone have any advice on choosing whether to take the LSAT or the GRE when applying?
Jennifer, do you want me to chime in here?
Sure, go ahead, Karintha.
All right, so it really depends. I think if you're somebody who's also pursuing a dual program, like for example, I was just speaking with a student this morning who plans to pursue a PhD as well. And so for her, I told her, please do not stress yourself out with taking 2 different tests. If you're the law schools that you apply to also accept the GRE, take 1 test to make your life a little bit easier. I did say that, I did warn her that, not all law schools accept the GRE, so she's going to need to do her research and homework that way to find out. But if it depends. I think that, as far as LSAT goes, the nice thing about taking the LSAT is that there's already a lot of historical data and research you can do to know what kind of LSAT score to be competitive. Whereas the GRE, the data is just not is available because it's so new as far as being an indicator for predictor for law school success. And so for those questions, I would urge students, if they have questions on GRE scores to be competitive for specific law schools, they should reach out to that law school specifically to make sure that they have that information before preparing, and to also understand that you have to pick one or the other. You definitely don't want to get yourself in a jam of, oh, I'm going to take one test because I didn't do as well in the other test. The issue with that is that law schools will always take the LSAT. So you definitely don't want to, if you're going to commit to one, you definitely want to stay committed to one and not, try to flip flop to the other one. But that's my input there.
Thank you, Karintha, and thank you, Camille, because I did not even know that the GRE was an option for some law schools. So I appreciate learning more about that. Okay, our next question is from Bailey. While being a student in law school, as well as someone seeking employment directly afterwards, how much freedom is there to pursue personal passions in taking courses or within possible entry-level jobs?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to this. And I'm assuming here that the conflict is that maybe your personal passions don't line up with the entry-level jobs you'd be interested in. However, I'd strongly urge you to sort of pursue those personal passions in law school to figure out if maybe you would want to go for those jobs. But here's what I'll say on this. You absolutely, it seems to me at least at this point, 1.5 years into law school, that you can. I am interested in going into commercial litigation and appellate litigation generally, but I participated in the Texas Law's Parole Project, and I helped, did some work to sort of try to get individuals out of prison. And that's not sort of the work that I want to do when I'm actually an attorney, but that was something that I was able to do while I'm in law school. And there are a multitude of clinics and volunteer pro bono opportunities that you could take advantage of law school. And I don't think that you have to make a trade-off between sort of doing that, if that sort of work is your personal passion, and taking courses that are going to aid you in your job. Another thing I'll add is that, at this point in law school, I've done a ton of interviews, probably like 30 interviews with a bunch of different firms. And I've heard from a lot of folks that while it does matter what courses you take in law school, like it sort of does matter, it also may not, because you're going to learn a lot of what you need to learn for the actual job of doing the law while you're a lawyer. And it's very rare that you'll hear, someone say, oh, you can't be an IP lawyer if you didn't take an intellectual property class while you were in law school. You really don't hear that sort of a thing. So I think the short answer of the question is, yes, I think you can pursue your personal passions with courses you take in law school while acknowledging that you're going to go into maybe a different job.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, so Roma asks, what is the overall opinion on gap years? I've heard that professional experience in between undergrad and law school might be beneficial on applications, but I would love to hear your opinions.
I can jump in on the gap year question. I'm K through JD. I didn't take off any time between kindergarten and my law degree at all. And I in part wish I would have, just for a bit of a break. I think it's really dependent on each individual to ascertain kind of what would be most helpful to them. I also worked while I was in undergrad, so I did have a balance of some work experience, right? So I think it depends on what you're shaping your narrative to be for entering into law school, and that might drive a bit of whether or not you want to take a gap year. Some people will prefer to take a gap year to try out various experiences from Peace Corps or Teach for America, or something that might, in their view, give them a competitive advantage for a law school application. Others do it just for the break, and in part to reset, because law school is its own adjustment. And sometimes it's helpful, I think, in that transition, if you do take a gap year, that you develop some work-related skills that might translate into law school, and give you a different approach to it than if you go straight from undergrad. And so I think some of it is, again, it's driven by individual needs and individual kind of parameters. But for me, I've seen it work both ways for students. Sometimes I'm a bit more hesitant about making a hard line suggestion one way or the other, but I think that's the lawyer. The answer is always, it depends. That's always the answer. But I think it's helpful for various reasons, but I think some of it might be driven by what your goals are with it, more than they are about whether or not it in and of itself is the best thing to do.
Can I add something real quick?
Oh, sure, please.
The question was about the admission process, and not having been involved in that, I can't speak to that, but I can say in terms of hiring law school grads, all of my best experiences have been hiring people who did have a gap year and had some sort of job in between undergrad and law school. I did not do that, so that's not the origin of my bias. But, I think there are probably a lot of reasons for that, but I think working in like a full-time job, it involves a slightly different set of muscles than going through school. And I think that people who have had that experience already and have learned those things, they really hit the ground running much more quickly when they leave school. And there are other benefits as well. But for me, for my part, looking at resumes and hiring people, I always look at that part very favorably.
Yeah, I think for employers, sometimes they view it as a maturity factor, or the maturity they view it as here's someone that has an understanding of the rigors or the day in and day out. In my law firm practice, that may have been a benefit in some ways. But I think sometimes it's driven by the end goals. For admissions process, it might be, I need to either shape something about my narrative for it. But I think for the back end for employment, it could be other goals that you might have for a gap year.
Can I ask something real quick also?
Sure, go ahead.
Also, if you've already taken the LSAT and you're planning on taking a gap year, the LSAT score that you took stays with you for 5 years, I'm pretty sure. So I know a lot of people are like hesitant of going straight from undergrad to law school because it's a big difference. If you are looking for like a job opportunity or just trying to have a break to clear your mental and prepare yourself for law school, the LSAT will stay with you for that 5 years. So you have 5-year break to keep that LSAT score and apply again. So I would advise a gap year. So that's just my opinion though.
And I'll chime in here if that's okay. I think that I didn't do a gap year, but I think that your experience, if you do a gap year or a few years, is not going to be super unusual in law school. I've spoken to folks who have worked for, last person I spoke to spoke for worked for 8 years as a paralegal before coming to law school. And she's a first-year student and I'm a second-year student. So it's not uncommon to have a ton of experience in the workforce or to just take a couple of years off before you go to law school. You're not going to be the only person who took a gap year if you take a gap year. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of law schools keep data on the entering class age. So I think we do, like, the average age of our 1L class will be X, right? So every law school will have that, and because so many people do come from other graduate programs, but they come from other careers. We've had veterinarians decide they want to be lawyers, right? So people that have come, I had a brain surgeon in my law school class that just gave it. He's like, going to law school. Some people they just love to learn, right? So there could be a wide range in the age of your law school class. Several people from the military, for example. So it won't necessarily be a 1-for-1. Everyone won't be 22 coming straight from undergrad.
Thank you all for those answers. And I'm realizing as I'm making astonished faces as Dean Henderson talks about the brain surgeon and the veterinarian, one of my heroes in African American literary studies, Carla Holloway, who is retired from Duke University. She completed a law degree while she was a professor because she was interested in the intersection of legal theory and African American literature. And now that she's retired, she's actually a mystery novelist. So I think, this encouragement to tune in to what is right for you and for your passions, to not think that choosing one passion today means that you have to let the others go forever. I think this is all excellent advice. So I see that we have a couple of more questions in the chat, so I'll return there. Camille asks or says, I'm currently a junior looking for an internship for this summer. Do you have any advice about what kinds of opportunities might be beneficial?
I'll chime in a bit here. I don't have any particular jobs that I could sort of point to and say, hey, go apply for this internship. Maybe other folks on this panel do. But what I will say is that you should be creative in sort of seeking out opportunities. In the summer between my senior year of college and my first year of law school, there was a lot of sort of political tension going around in the world, and I was doing pretty much nothing this summer, and I had sort of this urge to help. And so I reached out to the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I was like, hey, do you guys have any internship opportunities available, any volunteer opportunities available? And they said, no, but there's this guy called Brian McGiverin at the Austin Community Law Center, and you could reach out to him and maybe he'd have some work for you. And so I volunteered, and Brian was happy enough to take me on, and eventually ended up giving me a job there too. And so, yeah, I'd be creative in sort of seeking out opportunities. Don't just like look for internship programs that are, on, some message board somewhere. Be creative about it.
I'll chime in. I think for internship experience, I always suggest those that, I think to Jason's point, that might offer really substantive experience, like activities that where you can demonstrate on a resume or in your personal statement how that internship might have otherwise shaped you or given you new insight into something, right? So personal statements can be a ton of different things. But in part, I think, really trying to use your time in the most valuable way to you, if the goal of that internship for you is to otherwise demonstrate something for your law school application. I did not know what networking was. I had no language for it. Going into undergrad, I did not know what I was doing was networking through the activities that I was doing, but I knew I wanted to be in certain rooms or certain spaces or to develop certain skills. And so when opportunities came up, those were often the jobs that I would seek out. I'm like, all right, I want to see what it is like to work for an organization that deals with trial lawyers. Okay, so that's going to give me some exposure to lawyers. I know I want to be a lawyer. I've known I wanted to be a lawyer all my life, or at least since I decided not to be a veterinarian. But since that point in my life, I've known that, right? So I sought out experience that would give me some access to people that might really give me substantive work and not necessarily just, okay, can you make the coffee? Can you do the copies? That's a part of it, right? Or maybe a part of it as a college student. But can you take me to the deposition? Or can I be in these rooms where I get that real meaty experience? And 6 degrees of separation. A ton of people have had lives in the law through Texas Civil Rights Project. I interned at the Texas Civil Rights Project when I was a law student. I took Jim Harrington's civil rights litigation class while I was a student, right? So, but I met Jim Harrington before I got to law school. And so it was in part being in the right rooms with other people who gave me access to say, okay, this is someone you may want to know if this is the type of work you want to do one day.
Thank you, Dean Henderson. And that answer leads wonderfully into our next question from Roma. So a couple of panelists have discussed creating a narrative when applying to law school. Can anyone talk a little bit more about the importance of a narrative when applying? And I love this question because I'd actually jotted down one about the personal statement. I think that this genre it's very important, right, for law school and other graduate school applications, but it can also be kind of tricky. Yeah, I second Roma's question. Could anyone discuss crafting that narrative, presenting yourself in your personal statement, please?
Yes, as somebody who looks at a lot of personal statements for her job, I feel like I definitely have an invested interest in this question. So yes, there's a lot of different ways that you can create your own personal narrative. Really, from what I've heard from law school admissions webinars and talking to different law schools admissions offices, what's really important is that you have to think of all of your application as part of pieces of a puzzle. And so, your resume is going to speak to one side of you, all of the activities you participated in during your undergraduate career. Your transcript is going to talk about your academics, and of course, the other pieces, the letters of recommendation are going to speak to somebody else's viewpoints of you. So where where narrative becomes important, I think, is in the personal statement. And in your personal statement, what you really want to focus on is your voice, bringing up your voice as to who you are, and really, not just narrating your resume, but really providing an insight and a look into, maybe an experience you had, just like Dean Henderson just spoke to about maybe being in a courtroom or participating as part of an internship that really impacted you in maybe one particular moment that really just helped you decide this is the kind of law I want to practice. There's a lot of ways to approach that. But definitely, if you're having issues with or thinking about the personal statement, it is helpful, though, to come up with a narrative in terms of providing your personal narrative, your personal story of who you are on paper. That's what the personal statement really should be.
Thank you, Karintha. So I want to throw it open to the floor. We have time for one more question before we wrap. So are there any other questions out there? And again, feel free to raise your hand or to drop the question in the chat. Either format is welcome. Okay, so I don't see any questions. So first I want to convey the thanks that our attendees are also sharing in the chat to our panelists. And on that note, I'd like to give each panelist a chance to share some closing words, remarks, advice, just to cap off what I think has been a really engaging session. So any final remark that you'd like to share before we close for the afternoon?
I've got some thoughts. I'll just say, sort of, you guys are already, the folks who are in this panel and sort of who are listening in, you're already on the right track in the sense that you're sort of sitting in on a panel trying to get more information about law school. I think that sort of effort and that sort of enthusiasm is really important, and don't sort of forget that. Don't neglect that once you enter into law school, because I think effort and enthusiasm and just like caring about acquiring information and not just sort of, being pushed in a direction, but actually going out and seeking information. I mean, that is something that is incredibly useful in law school. And that is something that, that a lot of folks seem to sort of, leave that enthusiasm for learning about the law and the legal profession. And I think that you should just, maintain that as long as you can. I think that'll be helpful for you.
I'd like to chime in if that's okay. I've got some closing remarks. I get a lot of questions about what kinds of activities that are specifically law focused or within the legal arena that students should be focusing on as an undergraduate. And I would say, yes, you should explore those opportunities. Sometimes doing that internship for maybe a real estate law firm, you realize that real estate is not where I want to be, right? So it's about as much about learning what you do as much, where you learn sometimes what you don't want to do as far as that your experiential learning experience goes. But what I would say is this, what I tell students a lot is to basically pursue the activities that are most interesting to you, that you're most passionate about, pursue the causes and support those causes that you're most passionate about. And then work with me when you're ready to apply for law school, and I'll help you figure out where to put it on your resume. Ultimately, law schools are interested in well-rounded individuals who can tell a really well-written story of themselves on paper so that they know exactly who they're admitting into their school. And so, work with me through that process. But I would say, it doesn't matter what it is, get involved, and then, just do what really drives you, what motivates you.
One thing I want to share is I think the benefit about being at UT and being on campus with one of the top law schools in the country, the top law school in the state, is there are great opportunity. I know it's across campus, but there are great opportunities to come over and engage with our environment, to see kind of what a law school student's life is like. And working with our admissions office, of course, there are tours. I often will offer to students, sometimes I will say, you can come to my class, but I may call on you. But I have law students who mentor students from main campus, and they bring them to class. And so I think if there are early opportunities for you to dip a toe in the water of the law school environment, visit us, come by, see what life is like. I think, the gift that is the campus is that we are one bus ride or short walk away from you really engaging with what your future could be. So I would suggest that you take up, any opportunity that exists for that. But if you need encouragement, feel free to email me. I'll get you over. You email Jason probably. We will get you over, but our student organizations are tremendous resources too. And as I want to definitely shout them out, because they do a ton of work behind the scenes to really get prospective students interested. So if there are orgs that speak to your other interests, I would reach out to them as well.
Also, I have a small snippet. I'm assuming most of you guys are undergrad students, and even though I'm the president of the National Black Law Student Association, we are welcome to all students of all races, anything. We have meetings every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30. We have a law student panel tomorrow for our meeting, so definitely come out and hear what our law students from UT have to say about UT law and different advice. So I definitely encourage all of you to come out and hang out with us tomorrow.
Brian, do you want to take us out with the closing remark?
I think the one of the many good points that was made that I would take a moment to echo is about doing something you're passionate about. I think that if you're doing something you're passionate about, that's when you're going to shine. And so I think that's true when you're preparing for law school or after law school. So don't lose sight of that and look at lawyering or law school as an end in itself. I mean, it should be a means to an end.
Thank you. So Fallon Jones, Karintha Fenley, Shavonne Henderson, Jason Onyediri, Brian McGiverin, thank you so much for joining the session this afternoon. Thank you to our attendees with your great questions. I hope the answers have been useful to you. I know that they've been helpful to me as a professor. So the next time I have a student who's interested in law school, I have a great toolkit to draw from in advising them and directing them to the resources on campus. And last but not least, thank you to Christina Bryant, Alex Cunningham, and Kendall Gross from the Warfield Center and the Art Galleries at Black Studies. We're going to leave the Zoom room open for another 5 minutes because there's some great information in the chat. You are networking by being here to echo Dean Henderson, and folks are dropping their contact information. We also understand that people are in the middle of a busy work/school day. So if you need to leave, please do, but thank you again, and keep an eye out for upcoming Warfield Center events. We would love to have you back virtually or in person. Take care.